Morning, Riverbend. Yeah, I can tell. You're feeling it too. I want my hour back. I've been doing this for like 40 years, and every year when we have this day, I get angry. I want my hour. So it's just, I apologize if I'm a little out of sorts today. I'll be good in an hour. So you just get what you get. But I want to begin today by asking you a question. I want you to consider this carefully, not just here, but even as we go. I want you to contemplate this question. Is there anything that can be so badly damaged like this Oh, that's satisfying. Is there anything that can be so badly broken that it cannot possibly be repaired? I think in our experience, we say, yeah, well, absolutely. There are material things. We live in a disposable society, so we've made a calculation, probably unintentionally, that there are some things that are not worth repairing. It's easier to just throw them away than to go to the trouble of fixing it. We live in a society where materially we understand that things get old and they break down and they need to be repaired or they need to be replaced. Medically, we understand this. The unfortunate reality of our lives is things can go wrong with our bodies. And while we can do amazing things medically, it's possible for us to get to a place physically where what is broken in us cannot be repaired. I think we all come from time to time to a place in our life where, in a metaphysical sense, we realize that when our hearts are broken or our spirit is crushed or our mind is damaged, that it's possible that these things may never be made as they once were. They may never be fully repaired. Last week, we began a conversation about the ancient Japanese art form of kintsugi. In Japanese, the word kin means golden and sugi means rejoin. And kintsugi is the art of taking broken pottery or broken ceramics and rejoining it. And rather than disguising the repair is highlighted so that in the end, what is repaired may in fact actually be more beautiful. It may actually be better than new. We're looking at the life of the master kintsugi artist, Jesus of Nazareth, and today I want us to look at the life of a woman who believed that her life was broken beyond repair. And ask the question, is there anything that is truly beyond repair of the master? And talk about the one thing that I believe can always be restored. But before we talk about that, would you pray with me for a moment? Father in heaven, I would ask that the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart would be pleasing in your sight. That you would use your words spoken by your servant and anointed by your Spirit to remind us of the unbreakable hope that you offer us. Pray that we would rejoice in that and find peace in that today. I pray that for myself and for my family and for all of us connected through this place today. For I ask that in Jesus' name. Amen. They knew it needed to be fixed. They knew there was a problem, a serious problem, and the problem needed to be fixed. But the problem with the problem was they didn't know what caused the problem. And before they could fix the problem, they needed to find out why the problem existed. It was July the 17th, 1996. TWA Flight 800 was scheduled to depart John F. Kennedy Airport at approximately 8:19 in the evening on a direct flight to Charles de Gaulle International Airport in Paris, France. TWA Flight 800 was a Boeing 747. It had been in service since being manufactured by the Boeing Aircraft Company for just under 5 years. The aircraft had logged just over 90,000 flight hours. In fact, that very day, it had flown nonstop from Athens, Greece to JFK International in New York. The Flight 800 of TWA was cleared for takeoff at 8:19 in the evening, and it made its takeoff roll and went wheels up and turned to go north along the eastern seaboard, along the coast of New England. As the flight began to climb to its cruising altitude, the pilot, an experienced TWA captain named Ralph Kevorkian, noticed that their FQIS was, in his words, acting crazy. The FQIS is the fuel quantity indicating system. It's airplane talk for that was their fuel gauge. And it was indicating some abnormal readings, but almost as quickly as it seemed to malfunction, it sorted itself out, and the flight crew thought nothing of it. At 8:31 p.m. on July the 17th, 1996, a catastrophic explosion occurred on TWA Flight 800, literally fracturing the aircraft in two. The plane fell from the sky and landed in the Atlantic Ocean 10 miles off the coast of Long Island, just outside of a small city called Mauritius, Long Island. All 230 people on board TWA Flight 800 perished. As the NTSB began its immediate response, some of the first eyewitness reports suggested that there was a vapor trail that looked like perhaps a missile had been launched at TWA Flight 800. So immediately the NTSB enlisted the help of a number of government agencies, including the FBI. They began a search and recovery effort that was the most extensive, the most expansive, and the most expensive search and recovery effort in American aviation history. The recovery effort employed dozens of Navy divers and remote-operated vehicles and side-scanning sonar and laser mapping technology. It even required 13,000 runs by deep-sea dredges. In the end, it took them 10 months, but over the course of 10 months, they scoured a debris area in the Atlantic Ocean covering 40 square miles at a depth of almost 120 feet below the surface. By April of 1997, the NTSB and their forensic engineers had recovered 95% of the 747 wreckage. They took the wreckage to a Grumman aircraft warehouse in Calverton, New York, and it was there that forensic engineers began to reassemble the fuselage of the 747. The fuselage that they reassembled wound up being 94 feet long and 27 feet high. In August or in April of the year 2000, almost 4 years after the crash, the NTSB and the FBI published their accident incident report. They said that there was no physical evidence whatsoever of a missile impact, but the most likely cause of the catastrophic explosion on board TWA 800 was a simple short circuit in the FQIS system, the spark of which ignited the fuel in the center tank of the 747, costing all 230 people their lives. There is no doubt that we live in a broken world. We live our lives pushing back against that brokenness. It is in our DNA. It is in our human survival instinct to push back against the decay and the decline and the destruction of the universe that we live in, a universe that is subject to the laws of entropy, because we know that everything that is living will eventually die. In fact, everything that exists is under the forces of degeneration and decay. And we, in our nature to resist the onslaught of this broken world, find ourselves committed to fixing what we can. Frankly, some of us are better at it than others. Some of us are more obsessive about it than others. Some of us are actually what I would call pathological fixers. Have you ever met anybody like that? Anybody who just has to manage everything and control everything and make sure that everything is okay. I grew up in a household where my mother was a pathological fixer. And my mother didn't just fix the physical environment, she tried to fix the relational environment and the emotional environment and the spiritual environment. You grew up in my house, you didn't fight with your brother and sister because that was breaking the rules. And my mother needed our home to be a home that was fixed. If she was British, she would say it would be well fixed. Have you ever met anyone like that? Perhaps you are someone like that. The woman that we meet in the gospel story in the life of Jesus named Martha was very much like that. Martha was an obsessive fixer. The first time we meet her, it's in the 10th chapter of the book of Luke. It is in the final months of Jesus' life. And Jesus and his entourage, his 12 disciples, and the other various hangers-on and followers of his teaching were gathering in Martha's home in Bethany. Apparently, Jesus, when he was in Judea, didn't stay in Jerusalem. He stayed outside of Jerusalem in a village called Bethany. It was about 2.5 miles southeast of the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, on the far side of the Mount of Olives. Bethany was located on the road to Jericho. You might call it a bedroom community, a suburb of Jerusalem, if you will. And Martha's home became sort of the base of operations for Jesus when he was coming and going in the Judean area, when he was coming and going out of Jerusalem and in and out of the temple. On this day, there was probably a gathering of perhaps 15, 20, 30 people. And Martha, the obsessive pathological fixer, was making sure that everyone was well taken care of. This was in Martha's nature. It's interesting in Luke chapter 10 that Luke refers to the home in Bethany as Martha's home. In our enlightened day, it's nothing to refer to property that is owned by a woman or identified by a woman, but in that day it was unusual. It usually meant that she was a widow. But the theory that I like is a theory that Martha was not, in fact, a widow. She was married to a man named Simon. And we meet Simon because Simon apparently was struck with the disease of leprosy as an adult. And that meant that he was quarantined from the society. It made COVID look like the common cold. Leprosy was not just a physical, medical, or biological illness, it was also a spiritual illness. And it was believed that it was transmissible by association or in proximity. So the lepers in the first century were colonized in isolation. If you were diagnosed with leprosy, you were literally an outcast from your home and your community. That means that Martha, if Simon was in fact her husband, was a functional widow. She may have been able to take food to her husband and see her husband at a distance, but they lived separate lives until Simon came across a young rabbi from Nazareth. And he was the only person in history who was able to heal this physical and spiritual disease of leprosy. You see, that's the theory that I like. That's why Martha has this obsessive, I'm going to fix everything personality. She was surviving. She also had a sister, and her sister's name was Mary. And the tradition surrounding Mary is that she was a troubled child. She was a troubled young woman. She was victimized by demons. And I know many of you are familiar with what we would call the demons of addiction, or the demons of self-destructive choices, or the demons of behaviors that are corrosive to yourself and to others. This was Mary. And Mary, at some point in her life, had left Bethany and sought a life on her own in the north of Israel, in a village called Magdala. For a young woman to live on her own in the first century, not under the roof or under the care of a husband or a family, meant there was only one way that she could survive. It tells us when Jesus, this young rabbi, met Mary of Magdala, he delivered her from 7 demons. It's one of the between the lines miracles that we don't often appreciate, but if you have ever struggled with those demons of addiction or self-destructive behavior, you know that was a full-on miracle, that she was delivered from a catalog of these struggles. And so it is no wonder in Luke chapter 10, when Jesus and his disciples are gathered in Martha's home in Bethany, that Mary is myopically adoring Jesus, sitting at his feet and hanging on his every word. But this meant that Martha, the fixer, was left to be the only one who was seeing to the needs of her guests. She was so distracted and she was so caught up in the needs of everyone there and making sure that everyone was well settled and everyone was well fixed, that that she was exhausted. And she eventually, it says, came to a point where she either interrupted Jesus or she leaned down next to him and she says to him, "Don't you even care? Don't you notice that I'm the only one doing anything here? My sister is just sitting there staring at you. If you cared, don't you even care? Tell her to get up off her bum and help me out." Jesus then gives us a foresight into the thing that Martha most desperately needs. As a fixer in a broken world, she needs to be reminded that there are some things that are beyond fixing. And this is what Mary is focusing on. Mary is focusing on something that was repaired for her and repaired in her, something that will never be broken, that she can never lose. The next time we meet Martha, it's a few weeks later, perhaps a month later, back in Bethany. Well, the story in John chapter 11 doesn't begin in Bethany. It begins north of Bethany, probably a day or two's walk, possibly in the region of Nazareth, in the area of Galilee. Jesus has retreated to this area outside of Judea because he knows what's coming. In just a few short weeks, there will be the triumphal entry and he will be crucified. He knows what's ahead and he's waiting for that day. But John chapter 11 begins when Martha and her sister Mary send word to Jesus up in the northern part of Israel that his good friend, it literally says, the one you love, Lazarus, our little brother, is very sick. It literally means is on the verge of death. The note comes to Jesus and he receives it, and it says that he decided to stay where he was for 2 more days. It says that he loved Mary and Martha and Lazarus, but perhaps he knew that Lazarus was already dead. Perhaps he knew of the timing of the exact day he needed to show up in Judea, and he couldn't be put off of that schedule. But more than likely, more than likely, he knew exactly the timing of what he had to do. He waited 2 days, and then after 2 days, he suddenly says to his followers, to his disciples, we're going to go down to Judea because Lazarus, our friend Lazarus, has fallen asleep, and I'm going to wake him up. Now, this was obviously confusing to his followers. It's like he's asleep and you have to go wake him up. That seems like a disproportionate journey to make just to wake the guy up. And he says, no, you don't understand. Lazarus is dead. And for your sakes, I'm glad I wasn't there. Because what you will see when we go there is the thing that will sustain you. I will repair in you and I will fix in you something that is better than new, that can never be broken. They make their way from wherever they were, a day or two's journey, and by the time they get to the town of Bethany, Lazarus has already been dead for 4 days. He enters into the village and he asks the people, where is the body of Lazarus? And his family and friends say, come with us, we'll take you to the tomb. It's there, standing outside the tomb of Lazarus, that there are just 2 words recorded in John 11:35. Edakrosin ha Jesus. Jesus wept. In that moment, it says the people were amazed. They could tell how much he loved Lazarus. He then tells the people to move the stone to the side, and then he shouts out, Lazarus, come out. And the man who had been dead for 4 days walks out of the tomb, still wrapped in the burial cloths from his head to his foot. And Jesus tells the people who probably were paralyzed with astonishment, take the grave clothes off of him and set him free. Now, I don't know if you've noticed. I mean, I'm assuming that everyone here, everyone who has ever heard this story notices one thing about it, because that thing is so obvious. The obvious thing about the story of the resurrection of Lazarus from the dead is that Lazarus is not here. Trust me, if Lazarus was here, he'd be on all the talk shows. He'd be on Kimmel, he'd be on Fallon, he'd be on the morning shows, he'd be on CNN and on Fox. He'd be everywhere. 2,000-year-old man who was raised from the dead. People couldn't get enough of that. But in case you haven't noticed, he's not here. He's gone. Sometime between the time that Jesus raised him from the dead and now, you know what happened to Lazarus? He died again. And I don't believe it was that long afterwards. You see, the last time that Lazarus is even mentioned in the entire Bible is in the next chapter of John. In John chapter 12, it tells us that 6 days before the Passover, probably just a few days after Jesus had raised Lazarus from the tomb, 6 days before his triumphal entry, 6 days before his crucifixion and resurrection, before that series of events would begin, there was a celebration in Bethany, this time at the home of Lazarus. And it tells us that great crowds were pressing in on them, not just to see Jesus, but to see this guy who had been raised from the dead. I don't know about you, but I'd show up to see that. I'd want to hear this story. I'd want to see if what I heard was true. And the religious leaders got wind of this, and they realized that not only did they have to kill this young Galilean rabbi, they were going to have to kill Lazarus as well. Because you couldn't very well have a guy who had been raised from the dead running around telling people that this was the Messiah. I like to believe that probably around the same time that Jesus was arrested, that the priests sent the ketubim, the temple guards, secretly to Bethany. And I like to imagine that when they showed up at Martha's home where Lazarus was, that they came to kill him. And it's not hard for me to imagine that Martha tried to stop them. She tried to protect her younger brother, because Martha disappears from the pages of the Bible right there as well. You know, it's as amazing as the resurrection story of Lazarus is, as hard for us to get our heads around just how preposterous and outrageous that story is. The story is pointless if we think that the story is about raising Lazarus from the grave. Because the story is about so much more than that. You get a hint of it when Jesus was making his way into Bethany. At the beginning of John chapter 11, as he approached the village, word came that Jesus and his disciples were on the way, and Martha went out to meet them. And Martha met them on the road into Bethany, and the first thing that Martha says to him is, "If you had been here, my brother would not have died. You could have fixed this." And I know something about fixing things. Jesus looks at her and says, "Your brother will rise again." And she says, I know. I've been in this religion game a long time. I know that the hope of life after death. I understand all that. And Jesus says, no, you don't. Because I am that hope. I am the resurrection and the life. And if you believe in me, you will live. And if you live and you believe in me, you will never lose that hope. Ever. It can never be broken. Do you believe this? He asks Martha. And she said, it's as if I have always believed that. I have always searched for that hope, a hope that cannot be broken. We live in a broken world. I mean, I'm reminded of it on a regular basis, if not every day, multiple times a day. And it is in our nature to push back against that brokenness. And one of the most dangerous things that gets broken in our lives is our hope. That in this broken world, in this world of destruction and tragedy and chaos and confusion, our hope becomes lost or shattered or broken. Martha discovered there in Bethany, on the road to the resurrection of her brother, that there was one who can restore hope. There is one who can restore even that which is most desperately broken. He is the one from which nothing is too badly broken to be restored. It was on February the 25th, just a few weeks ago, 2021, that the NTSB announced that they were decommissioning the hangar in the Grumman aircraft hangar in which TWA Flight 800 had been reconstructed. They announced that over the last 25 years, the reconstruction of Flight 800 had served its purpose. They had digitally mapped every piece of it, and they had used it for 25 years, training NTSB forensic investigators. It had been a laboratory for 25 years, but now the archives were sufficiently digitized, and the lease on the building was coming due. And over the 25 years, that reassembled wreckage has never been made available to the public. Only the families of those who lost their lives in TWA 800 were ever allowed to see it. And so they announced that this coming July, over 25 years since the crash of TWA 800, the project, amazing forensic engineering, was going to be dismantled and sold for scrap. It was, when all the accounting was done, the most expensive search and recovery effort ever undertaken by the United States aviation industry. It wound up costing almost $40 million to recover the pieces of TWA Flight 800, some of which were smaller than the size of your fist, 120 feet below the ocean, 10 miles from shore. But what they learned there, what they saw when they restored the fuselage, taught them about what possibly caused the accident. And the FAA had every 747 that existed retrofitted. And since that day, not another 747 has ever crashed because of a short circuit in the FQIS or a malfunction in their fuel system. In fact, the design of aircraft that have been built since that day have been designed with inert gases in the fuel tanks, and mitigation efforts have been put in place in advance. It's impossible for us to even say how many lives were saved because of that forensic engineering and that particular investigation. But you know what that investigation could not do? As amazing as that engineering feat was, as astonishing as the detail and the technical expertise that produced that understanding and recovered all of that wreckage, one of the things that it could not do was ever make that plane fly again. And the thing that it was absolutely impossible to do was to restore to life any of the 230 people who were lost. The limitations of what we can fix are obvious to us. In the art of kintsugi, a kintsugi master takes the broken pieces of a bowl and with a skillful and experienced touch repairs the pieces. And because of the skill and the talent and the experience and the wisdom of the master, those pieces are not simply put back in place. They are replaced, and what is produced is perhaps more beautiful, perhaps even better than new. This is the story of Jesus, the kintsugi master, the one who restores that which is impossible to restore, that which we believe can never be repaired. Our hope. He is the one for whom it is never impossible. Our hope in him can always be restored, no matter how badly broken or damaged or wounded or destroyed. I'm enjoying that way too much. So maybe the question today is not, is there anything that can be so badly broken that it cannot be restored? Maybe the question I want to leave with you today is this: is there anyone who is too badly broken that they cannot be restored? The lesson of Martha answers the question: no.